Ladies and gentlemen, as an architect, I design spaces, buildings for art. And as an architect, whenever I have an opportunity as an advocate for art, I try to persuade whoever commissions a building, whatever kind of building, in the public domain usually, but not always, to integrate works of art. And with my wife, Elena, we as a family live with art. And those three worlds, I find it impossible to separate. You could say that we curate art within our own domestic spaces. In the same way, I've found myself curating within galleries. And so I'd like to share some insights into those three different worlds and the way in which they blend together. And at the end, just make a few kind of hints of the way that I see the future. And I start really with a project which is now almost 30 years back. And that was a small centre for the arts in the south of France, in Nîmes. And it was really conceived by the mayor as a catalyst for urban regeneration. And this was, at the time of the competition for this project, this was the site. Very sad. And this building has been an extraordinary catalyst for change. And on its 25th anniversary, I found myself being given the opportunity to curate a show. And so I had this kind of blank canvas and brought together works from friends, from artist friends, from other museums, and also the collection. So for me, this was an extraordinary opportunity to learn more about the design of spaces for art firsthand by integrating these works, creating visual links, historic links between artists who'd become friends in the past, Bridget Riley here, and a kind of glimpse of a domestic space where a mirror, the juxtaposition of a Graupner with Riley, and also evoking here in a project the way in which I was able to persuade her to do something she'd never done before, and that was to create a three-dimensional sculpture which goes through 14 floors of this Citibank building in London. And again, the merging of a work here by the artist Ai Weiwei, devoted very movingly to me through our friendship, and to be able to juxtapose that with the work here of Dan Flavin, and to create synergies. And in the same way, in the Norman Foster Foundation, the headquarters in Madrid, then there's a Flavin which again is juxtaposed here with a model of Mexico City Airport. And if you go through that opening and you turn right, then you find another work by Juan Munoz of a Chinese individual next to Beijing Airport, the model. So very much connections and seeking to dissolve the boundaries between art, architecture, design, artifacts. For me, they're all part of the same visual story. And picking up that theme of Juan Munoz, where I found in the storage of an art gallery, and to then bring that to life for the public. And And again, the movement of a work here, the boccioni, within our domestic setting, and bringing that into the public domain of a museum. And finally, nothing is ever permanent in that sense. Here it's located in the context of the foundation in Madrid, next to objects, architecture, Le Corbusier's car, and in it was mentioned earlier, I thought very nice reference as a pavilion, a building for the Sir Robert and Lady Sainsbury collection, and here they are on the staircase of their then Smith Square home, and on the right in Bob Sainsbury's study. And the idea, their very strong personal desire to break down the boundaries between the academic world and the public display of art. So the building is really one roof which overlaps the teaching of the history of art, and also the pleasure of enjoying their collection. And perhaps the most radical move, aside from bringing these two worlds together literally under one roof, was to explore the idea of a gallery without fixed walls that would offer a flexibility for changing and circulating their works. And so the concept of bringing together furniture, display cases, movable walls was explored firsthand when the building was a construction site. So here you can see them seated at the furniture that would eventually find its way into the finished building, and very much a part of a very personal process. And here you get a glimpse of that. Again, tunable natural top light, the ability to be able to shut down completely and create a kind of black box. And here you get a feeling for the living room quality of that space, encouraging intimate groupings and merging these different worlds. At that time, Sir Robert was chairman of the trustees of the Tate, and there was an extraordinary reclining figure sited in the grounds. And at the time, with Henry Moore and the Sainsburys, we mocked that up in the form of a kind of plywood silhouette, so that we could literally engage in the dialogue between the landscape, the work of art, and the architecture. And that resonates, again, the same figure by an extraordinary coincidence, which we acquired and cited in the grounds of our home. And there's a kind of dialogue with a sculpture which you can see in the distance by Tony Caro, again making that visual and historic connection, because Caro was a pupil of Henry Moore. And that work, together now with the boccioni, which you can see in the background in the new pavilion of the foundation in Madrid. So this kind of constantly changing world between the formal public domain and the more private world of our family. If I move to New York, and a tiny sliver of a site for a private gallery for Angela Westwater, and in this tiny site, very, very narrow, the way in which you move people vertically in addition to the staircase, and also move works of art, becomes this big red lift, an elevator. And that elevator is a kind of gallery in its own right. And so part of the drama of entering this gallery is to walk underneath that with the great kind of hydraulic rams. And the opening exhibition, that was a gallery which was curated by the artist, literally a moving gallery between floors. And here, to exploit the vertical dimension of the space and to create a variety of spaces for changing exhibitions. If I move from a new building in New York to perhaps going back several decades, the first project where we engaged with a historic building, which was almost a kind of master plan to bring a new life to the Royal Academy of Arts. And if you look at the view of the original Burlington House from the 19th century, early 19th century, which started the development, then the way in which that building, you can see it on plan on the right-hand side, and the gap between that historic building and the very, very large addition, which is the Royal Academy, the galleries as we know it, was that was the rear facade originally in 1815, the back of Burlington House, and Burlington Gardens extended from it. And you can then see the gap between the original house, that window circled in red on the right, and the big 19th century additions, the huge galleries that are the Royal Academy. And by scooping away that, we utilized what was filled really with storerooms, and became the kind of entrance space to new galleries, the Sackler galleries, created on the roof. And again, natural light, which can be tuned so that for certain exhibitions, flexibly, it can be the equivalent of a black box. A similar process at the British Museum, huge growth in the visitor numbers, and at the time of a competition to address some of the really serious issues of the time, one of which was that to get to a gallery, the only way you could do it would be to go through one gallery to get to the next one. And the clue to easing that congestion and making the galleries more accessible, the experience for visitors more pleasurable, the clues were really to look back into the past. And I've said on many occasions that to look far ahead to the future, you first have to look back to the past. And looking back to the past, although there was no visible courtyard to the British Museum, we realize that in the past there was a courtyard, and shortly after the death of the original architect, the brother, also an architect, inserted into that space a great circular building, and you can just see on the left the edge of that circular building, and parts of the courtyard were still visible, a bit like the Royal Academy, filled with nondescript, nothing kind of building, storage, rubbish. And by scooping all that out and recladding the central circular library and giving it its identity, and then with a big glass bubble, transparent bubble, to create a gathering space, then you can come, as you do now, into this space and go into any of the galleries. You don't have to go through one gallery to another gallery, and it's a kind of urban room. It's a celebratory space which is devoted to many different kind of activities. Some of the same issues we found in a project for the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, And we brought back the original entrances, which had been sealed, closed up, because, again, in the 50s, for some of the trends that we heard earlier, in terms of making it more domestic, more friendly, somehow the big master plan had been lost. And part of our regeneration of the MFA was to create a different kind of version of the central space of the British Museum, but an opportunity for large gatherings, different kinds of exhibitions, here, a celebration luncheon, and then we regenerated probably about 30 different galleries, and this is kind of typical of one flexible space, the ability for the curators, as we saw earlier in the Rijksmuseum, to be able to choose the colors, the juxtaposition of the old masters, and that curating on a domestic level in our home brought together a work of Ribeiro, and I was fascinated to see the same artists, extraordinary paintings here earlier this morning in the wonderful exhibition of old masters, and this is a part of the entrance experience in our home. You can see the Ribeiro on the right. There's the Houdin, which is a terracotta portrait of Voltaire, who was a frequent visitor to this space, and a James Turrell on the left. The Turrell changes its image, its colors. One morphs into another. A very Zen-like experience, changes over a 3-hour cycle, and for me is very evocative of a kind of kinetic, mobile Rothko. If I look at a different kind of challenge, here the Lembach Museum in Munich, and the challenge there to add an extension of our time alongside it, and to make a physical connection internally. So here, with the commission work by Olafur Eliasson, you can see within the entrance of the new building, you get a glimpse of the historic fabric, and as you move around that junction between the two, you can see the serried galleries of the old Lembach house and the corridor which connects them with a new gallery which, by virtue of the proximity of the new and the old, is essentially windowless. But here, working with a local major lighting manufacturer, we're able to create an extraordinary quality of daylight and range of artificial lighting. Another completely different kind of challenge for my wife's Ivory Press in Madrid was to take a kind of underground space with a vertical ramp, to turn that ramp for vehicles into pedestrian steps, and what was historically an old printing house becomes an exhibition space and a bookshop integrated together, one next to the other, and this world of contemporary books with artist books historically from the past, and so that old print house, and in a way respecting the textures of its industrial past, to create an exhibition space here for works of Prouvé, but many different kinds of exhibitions, and visually linked to it a space for artist books, historically probably, almost certainly, the best collection in one space of artist books going back in time. Going back in time in Florida to the Northland Museum, extraordinary changes since the birth of this gallery, public gallery donated by the Nortons at the beginning of the 20th century, which was orientated to the sea. But over time, the highway becomes the dominant element. So the challenge here was to take the back of this museum and literally turn it into the front, and to respect the galleries, to respect the history, to bring those back to life, but also to celebrate this amazing tree which becomes the anchor. So this, on the main highway, retaining certain key elements and adding the ingredients which the museum lacked in terms of social spaces, teaching spaces. And here you can see the work of Klaus Oldenburg, donated by one of the trustees, in a reflecting pool. So this, with its entrance canopy, celebrating the kind of historic tree. And if you look through the window just underneath the tree, you can see the idea of a visiting artist. In this case, it would be Thomas Haggerty, and a social focus of this great room, a kind of social space which again unifies the different axes of the existing galleries around it, and using for the first time a garden, creating a garden space, sculpture space, new dining facilities, and celebrating the landscape, the climate, and also accommodating a recent bequest of outdoor sculpture. So very much of the place. Of the place, we heard earlier about the historic Prado, the Hall of Realms, originally a military museum, added to layer by layer by layer over the centuries. And so our design response as a team, and the key members of the team here this afternoon, was to go back to the original historic fabric, arguably one of the oldest, if not the oldest building surviving in Madrid, to go back to that facade and to create the very public expression, to link it to the fabric of the city, to recreate outside of it a new civic space. And the colonnade, a very traditional device, as valid today as it's ever been, and to bring back to life the historic Hall of Realms through research, to bring back the details which had been taken away, and to repopulate it with the old masters of the period, and to use that as an opportunity to create something which does not exist in Madrid at the moment in any gallery, which is a very large, flexible, open, column-free space for contemporary art at the upper level. And that is a very tunable space. So it can be one space, and very much learning from the Sainsbury Centre of decades earlier, that you can create intimate spaces within that, and you can control the natural light, the views, you can blank those out and create a kind of intimate new world. Very much in the public domain was a collaboration between myself and Jaime Plensa, a temporary sculpture in the Italian Alps on top of a mountain. And the idea was to create in circular form the coordinates that would link that place with the artist studio and with our studio in 3 different locations. locations, and then by building in under the ice lighting to bring that alive at night. And here you can see the two families coming together at that time. I realized, looking at my children, it was really quite a long time ago. Working with artists here, Jean-Claude and Christo, and engaging with them in wrapping the Reichstag, which was a hugely symbolic act. It had probably taken them about 20, maybe 30 years to persuade the Berlin city authorities to wrap the Reichstag before reconstruction started on our project to bring that back to a new life. And here the extraordinary power of art to move emotionally a city. And this became a 24-hour spectacle. And the only criticism was that it had taken decades for the Christos to persuade, to advocate, to get this. And then the big reaction is, why does it have to go? Why can it not stay longer? So a very nice paradox there, and that was the entry to the Reichstag as it now is. If I go back to that starting point of curating, here you can see on the left an extraordinary, powerful work by one of our favorite artists, Grabner. My connection with him and with many other artists was the Reichstag itself, which, aside from being a seat of parliament, of government, is also in its own way a gallery of artists from the original occupying powers of Berlin. And what I found fascinating was to engage with these artists, together with members of the design team, working together on the project. So to go to their gallery, and then eventually out of that process would be a work in the public spaces of the new parliament. And here with Polke, who I recall with Elena, he had two directions. He wasn't sure which way to go, and he asked our opinion, and we told him firmly, and he sort of leapt around the room, jumping up and down and saying, "Wonderful, wonderful, I needed somebody to give me this direction." And the outcome of that was, the question was, could I use the medium of advertising as an artist? And we said, absolutely. And in the same way, Richter said, here, he proposed a work. You can see the model of the entrance, and so we're visiting him, and he's saying, I've never worked with glass before, and you know so much about glass. Would you give me technical advice to bring that kind of dream to a realization? And here you can see the real space, on the left the model space, and working with him, he realizes this work in glass. Our role is totally invisible, behind the scenes, but part of a creative interplay. And in the same way, Uke, famous for his works with nails, is doing something he's never done before. He's been given the opportunity through this collaboration to actually create a building within a building, a chapel. And here we see that chapel, we see the models. Again, this kind of creative interaction between different disciplines. And again, Baselitz in the entrance space, Jenny Holzer also in the entrance space, a kind of tubular insertion into the circulation, and really bringing forth all the printed parliamentary records through the history of the Reichstag, the speeches which had been given in there from its birth. And when we found ourselves, again, as a family, with an apartment, and you would come out of the elevator and there's a column, how do you transform that so you really don't feel you're walking into a column? And with Jenny Holzer then brought that to life as a work. So when you step out of the elevator, which is behind this work, and this again is in the languages of our family, and working domestically with an artist, in this case, former living room in the past in London, and a view of the Thames on the right. So how do you bring that river to life on a back wall which brings in natural light? A work by Richard Long, a similar insertion to a building in south of France, in Cap Ferrat, and continuing from that domestic setting through the public setting of the headquarters of the Hearst Corporation in New York, an entrance experience which combines two artists, Jamie Carpenter in terms of the water feature, the escalators move up alongside that, and here you get a glimpse of the combination of Jamie Carpenter, the water, the glass, the luminosity, the movement into this entrance space, the tower above it, and the integration between movement, building, and work of art, which is literally the mud of the Hudson applied to a wall. Again, the kind of transition from a domestic space with this artist, the gunpowder artist, and the translation of that into the upper reaches of the Hearst Tower. And again, the dialogue between the domestic space, Sol LeWitt, in the entrance hall of a domestic building, and that resonates with the work here in the School of Management at Yale University. So very much blurring the edges between study, contemplation, movement, and works by an artist. Works of art can also have an invisible functional role. If you go past the Houses of Parliament in London, you'll see these very ugly, protective works, which, for me, are a total civic affront. It's like a vandalistic act. One respects the fact that the seat of government has to be protected against suicide attacks and truck bombs and so on. But as an alternative to that, I'd like to show how, in a new building here for Bloomberg, their new headquarters in the financial heart of London, creating a public space, and here Cristina Iglesias using her amazing works with water as a security system. So you don't realize that this is fulfilling the role of those very ugly kind of solid blocks in front of Parliament. This is performing the same function, but you can sit on it, you can contemplate it, you don't know that its hidden role is also that of security. If we move within the heart of this building, and you can see the plan, that kind of vortex-like swell, which is evocative of the pedestrian ramp within the building and is the entrance experience. And that space is inseparable from the work by Olafur Eliasson, which is the ceiling of the space. And I think the lesson here is that if you really want to integrate architecture and art, then it's not something that you come along afterwards and kind of stick on as a postage stamp, as a gesture, as a cosmetic kind of lipstick. It really has to be right at the beginning of the creative process. And there is, again, a different kind of security, a need to create a fire barrier between the ground floor and the open upper reaches of the building. So if you go above and look down, it's like a lake. It's the other side of that work. And as you go through the different spaces by this circular, almost Serra-like ramp, then it takes you through various contributions, integrations by artists along the route in the spaces. So again, a kind of dissolve between these two worlds. And a very witty intervention by Michael Craig Martin here. So his point is that the work is a work in itself, but it's also serving as an orientation device. So in the floor above, you see the upper part of the clock. So his point is, he's explaining it here to a visiting group, that somebody can say, I'll meet you at the bottom half of the clock, or so on. Again, the dialogue between a domestic work here, Conrad Shawncross, a young artist, rising star. This is a work probably about that large, which was in my studio at home, is now in the foundation. And if you take one of those tiny pieces at the base, then here it is, writ large. This was a maquette for a much larger work, and that work now finds itself in the finishing stages of a building under construction for Comcast in Philadelphia, a kind of vertical research building with a hotel at its summit. And the experience of entering that public space, which is the dissolve between Comcast and the civic life of the city at the lower level. Here we can see it in place. This is now finished. In the ceiling is a work by Jenny Holzer. So these two artists converge, and this little film sequence gives you a flavor of what it will be like very, very shortly to enter from the public world outside opposite a church, which is in front of this building. And as you move through the public space with trees, cafes, you go up the escalators, past the Shawcross. The ceiling is alive with Jenny Holzer above. And as we turn round, there's a little insertion from the building as a building site so that you can see the church behind. So again, a very kind of dynamic reconstruction of that experience. I have a kind of feeling when I look at a graph like this, and it shows historically the birth of very familiar public galleries. And you see at this point in time this extraordinary explosion which produces the need for master plans, as I've described, for the British Museum, for the MFA, could be the Louvre. And I just have the feeling that this extraordinary explosion starts to create the feeling that perhaps this is the new religion, the new kind of place of worship. And I just wish that I'd had the benefit of the earlier insights into the Rijksmuseum, because I visited there earlier this month on a kind of epic bike ride, and we spent a morning in the Rijksmuseum, and it was a great experience. And it's an even greater experience to have the historic insights. And on that trip, we paid a pilgrimage to this amazing work by Van Eyck. And the Van Eyck, which would be, it all closes up on itself, and on a particular religious occasion, a festival, it would be opened up to the amazement of the religious community. And as we visited that, in Ghent Cathedral, it had been banished to a kind of vestibule, kind of blockwork walls, and becomes, in a way, the cathedral becomes the museum. And I have a feeling that the museum becomes the cathedral and the place of worship. Thank you. I think you might like me to invite questions. That's why you waved me back. So I'm happy to... I can imagine you're all hungry for lunch. But, very good, thank you.